I now want to introduce our next speaker. Climate change is a physical problem and a psychological problem. And that is what he's going to tell us about. So I'd like to welcome, if I can read this without my glasses, Per Espen, what we think about when we think about global warming.
So, hi. Hi. I'm Espen. Yeah, Per Espen Stoknes is my full name, but when I was a kid, my family called me just Espen. And now my American friends have started calling me Espen as well. But I've never been in Espen before. So finally, I'm Espen in Espen. I do feel at home. Well, today, I'm going to give you a tailored version of a TED talk I gave recently. Because today, so far, we heard so much about technologies, exciting opportunities, quite technical possibilities. But how do we broaden the conversation? How do we get people engaged in solving global warming? That's the question I'm going to give you on how to broaden the conversation, maybe beyond the choir, or what you call the AREDAY crowd here. So I'd like to start with running 2 short experiments with you all. Is that okay? Yep. Your task is to notice if you feel any difference as I speak. Okay? Here we go. We are measuring rising carbon dioxide levels, now above 410 ppms. To avoid IPCC's scenario, RCP 8.5, we need rapid decarbonization and global energy transition. Because the global carbon budget, for 66% likelihood, to meet the 2-degree target by 2100 is only approximately 800 gigatons. Okay, now let me try something else. Ready? Here we go. Science tells us we're heading for an uninhabitable Earth. Monster storms, killer floods, devastating wildfires, crazy heat waves. When a blazing sun is going to cook us. Our economy is collapsing. You know, July 2019 was so unexpectedly hot. The warmest ever measured. It's freaking out climate scientists. We now have 12 months left. 12 months to start cutting emissions. If not, we're heading towards a boiling Earth, a hellhole. Cut. So, I'd like to hear from all of you what you did feel or maybe not feel, but the first, maybe somewhat detached, confused. The other, maybe a little bit fearful, or angry, or maybe just comfortably numb. So again, the question I just asked, how do we get people engaged in solving global warming? And why don't these 2 ways of communicating work? You see, the biggest obstacle to solving climate change is about 6 inches thick. It lies between your ears. Building on a rapidly building body of psychological and social science research, I've explored the main 5 inner defenses that stop people from engaging. Now, when people hear climate news coming straight at them, the first inner defense comes up, which is distance. Now, when we hear about the climate, we typically hear about something distant in time, the year 2100, distant in space, typically Arctic ice or glaciers melting. The problem is very abstract. We hear about ppm levels and it's impossible to see it. It's slow moving. You have to think in centuries, in huge scales of gigatons. So it's not here and not now to most people. And since it seems so far away from me, it feels outside my scope of influence. I feel helpless about climate disruptions. There's nothing I can do anyway. So in our everyday lives, our brain makes us prefer to focus on nearer things, such as our job, our children, or how many likes we get on Facebook. Now that's real. Next comes doom. When climate change is usually framed as something, we hear about it as a catastrophe, a looming disaster. It's going to bring losses, costs, and sacrifice. That makes us feel fearful, or guilty maybe. But after the first fear is gone, my mind soon wants to avoid the topic. The brain learns to just tune out, go somewhere else. After 30 years of scary climate change communications, more than 80% of media articles still used disaster framings. But people habituate and then finally desensitize to this doom overuse. Many of us start to suffer of something we could call apocalypse fatigue from watching too much collapse porn, maybe. So the third defense is dissonance. If what we know, that our fossil fuels contribute to global warming, conflicts with what we do, drive, eat beef, fly, then so-called cognitive dissonance sets in. This is like an inner discomfort. We may feel a little bit like hypocrites. In order to get rid of this discomfort, our brain quickly starts to come up with, justifications. I can tell myself, for instance, that, well, you know, my neighbor, he's a much bigger car than I have. Or my colleague, she flies 3 times on holiday, but I only fly once. Or, you know, it doesn't matter a dent if I change my diet when I'm the only one to do it. I might even want to start to doubt climate change or climate science. You know, I could say to myself, well, the climate, you know, it's always changing. All of these justifications make us feel better, but only by dismissing what we know. And when in dissonance, psychology has shown that our behavior starts to influence what we think. And for me personally, my dissonance comes up when I realize that I'm flying to Espen from Oslo in order to speak about, yes, the climate for 30 minutes. Now on to denial. If we keep silent, if we ignore or ridicule the facts of climate disruptions, we may find inner refuge from fear or guilt. You see, denial doesn't come from a lack of information or knowledge or intelligence. Not at all. In a state of denial, my brain may recognize a troubling knowledge of some kind, but it will stuff it under the carpet, and I can go on living as if I don't know what I do know. That's a kind of double life, often reinforced by others, in my family, in my community, agreeing, we shouldn't raise this issue. I might even get alarmed by a piece of climate news one day, but by Monday morning, I'll live as if I never heard. Finally, identity. Alarmed climate activists demand that the government takes action. Students are going on strike, demanding that government do something. And climate scientists usually recommend more regulations and higher carbon taxes. But consider what happens when people who hold, for instance, more conservative values hear from some activists that government ought to expand even further. Particularly in rich Western democracies, surveys find they are much less likely to believe the science. It's understandable. If I hold conservative values, I may prefer small government and big cars to tiny cars and huge overreaching government. So if climate scientists start to call for larger government, then I'm less likely to trust the scientists. In this way, cultural identity and values start to override scientific fact, despite education. So my identity trumps truth any day. After recognizing how these 5 Ds kill engagement, how can we go beyond them? What works? What does the research say on this? Well, new research shows how we can flip these 5 defenses into key success criteria for a more brain-friendly and less partisan climate communication. And this is where it gets really exciting, and where we find the 5 S's, the main evidence-based solutions for what does work. So take, for instance, distance. We can flip that to social. We can make climate feel much nearer, personal and urgent by bringing it home. We do this by spreading social norms that are positive to solutions. Let me illustrate. If I believe my friends and neighbors will take action, I will too. We can see from map data, for instance, how rooftop solar is spreading from neighbor to neighbor like a virus. It's actually contagious. This is the power of peer-to-peer. No longer an egghead scientist, but it's, him. And we're creating the new normal together. It's not just solar panels. Last year in Oslo, 2 psychologists that I supervised, I asked them to check, is there any statistic significance on the addresses of new electric vehicle purchases? So they analyzed 15,000 electric vehicle purchases and plotted them on maps, on streets, to see if there is any regularity. And this is what they found. This is the map from Oslo, quite new. The gray, there is no significance. The red, yes, if the neighbor got an electric car, then I got one too. So clearly, statistically significant high levels of peer pressure. And the blue ones, that's the same thing working in the opposite way. There are no electric cars here, so why the beep should I have one? They're just bogus. So you can see how the power of social networks, peer-to-peer, actually changes how Oslo looks in terms of transportation. Then we can flip doom by using more supportive framings. Rather than lots of backfiring frames, such as disaster, cost, penalty, we can reframe climate as being about human health. For instance, with delicious plant-based burgers, good for you, good for the climate, or about new tech opportunities, as we heard about here, hydrogen, electric cars, or we could speak about safety and being preparedness, and not all the incredible new jobs that are coming up. Jobs in solar, for instance, just crossed the more than 10 million jobs mark, more than in fossil fuels at all. And to create engagement, psychology has found that we should present on balance about 3 to 1 supportive framings, 3 supportive framings to each threat you come up with. It's about triggering the lust center in the brain. You should sell the fizzle, not try to sell hell. Fourth, we can counter dissonance. By making everyday climate choices much simpler. It's often called nudging. With better choice architecture, we can make climate behaviors much more convenient and frequent. Take food waste, for instance. Studies show that when you take food at a buffet, food waste goes way down by simply reducing the plate size a little, because it looks full on the smaller size but half empty on the bigger. This nudge, smaller plates, has a big effect on the portion size. And there are even bigger effects if we make defaults for green power or make it easier to have solar rooftop installed, or default green pensions that fund low carbon footprint investments. So there are hundreds of these green nudges waiting to be put to use. As more behaviors are nudged, dissonance goes down. Fourth, we can flip denial by tailoring signals that visualize our progress. We can provide motivating feedback about how well we're doing in our problem solving, as individuals, as teams, and as companies, and cities. Maybe you've improved your transport footprint, or waste less energy in your building. One app that can help you share these kind of results is called ducky.eco. You can log your own everyday actions, and then you can see how well your team or your company or your city is doing all together. How well are we performing today, this week? And then you can compare yourself with another city. So you could have maybe, I don't know, who would Espen like to compare themselves with? Huh? Vale, okay. So you suddenly have a setup. You start to get a social competition. Finally, we can flip identity with better stories. Our brain loves stories. So we need better stories of where we all want to go. The world we want. And to engage people, we should share more stories about the heroines and the heroes making real change happen. For instance, personally, I'm proud of my hometown of Oslo is now embarking on a bold journey of electrifying all transportation, whether buses, bikes, or cars. This doesn't happen by itself. And one of the people spearheading this is Christina Bu, who has been for years leading the Electric Car Association. She was fighting every day, being ridiculed at first. But now, following Oslo, UK and France, India and China have announced plans for ending the sales of new fossil cars. In Oslo, we see lots of enthusiastic EV owners share their electric stories with friends and neighbors. So through story, we come full circle back to social norms. And thousands of innovative climate communicators are now putting these 5 pragmatic solutions to work. It's clear that individual action doesn't really solve the climate problem by itself. It doesn't. But what they do is to build stronger bottom-up support for the policies and the large-scale investments that really can. That is why getting people engaged is so crucial. So, but how do we avoid burnout and defeatism? Because it is a long way to go. I started this talk by testing 2 ways of communicating with you: scientific abstractions and doomism. I'd also like to share a 3rd way with you that I've been exploring recently. It's about reimagining climate as the living air. You see, the climate isn't really outside of us. At a deeper level, it's not about some abstract climate far away from us. It's really about this air that is surrounding us. The air you can feel in this room right now. The air that moves now in your nostrils. This air is our Earth's skin. It's amazingly thin compared to the size of the Earth or the cosmos that it shields us from. Far thinner than the skin of this apple compared to its diameter. Far, far thinner. And when we look up, it may look infinite, but this beautiful, breathable air is only 5 to 7 miles thin. A fragile wrapping around this massive green, blue, and white ball. So, another experiment. Everyone. Very simple. Can you just take a deep breath and notice how the air is flowing as you do so? The way it moves. Now, being inside this skin connects us all closely. The one breath you just took now You know, it contained 400,000 argon atoms that Gandhi breathed during his lifetime. Imagine that. Inside this unsettled, fluctuating thin film, all life is protected, nourished and held. It insulates, regulates temperatures in a range that is just suitable for water and life as we know it. Mediating between the blue oceans and the black eternity above us, the clouds carry all the billions of tons of water needed to replenish the soils. The air fills the rivers, stirs the waters, and it waters the forests. So, what is climate change, if not a consequence of failing to respect or even notice this elemental medium in which we're all immersed? Is not global warming, or rather global weirding, an unintended consequence of taking the air for granted? How come we stopped noticing the air itself and started to speak about ppms? You know, to be born as a human is to be born into the air, and to be is actually to be inside this air that sustains us. So I was up on the mountain here yesterday. I came a day early, and luckily I found time to go up all the way to the ridge on Elk Camp. And then this view here came to me, or I came to the view, rather. I was astounded. The delicate dance of mountain and clouds, the way the light moves, the way the air moves, the way it murmured over the ridge. This delicate dance of mountain and clouds, feeding the forests, nourishing the aspen. Yes, aspen, here I am. Nourishing me. Watering the mountain spruce, putting on cloud clothes, morning dress, afternoon gown. You know, we are inside this valley right now, while we speak about all these global issues. We're inside the air-filling aspen. A last experiment. Are you okay? Can we all be aspen a little bit? Do you know how the wind and the air makes the leaves move? So I have only one hand, but you have two. Let me see. Can we make an aspen forest here? Yeah. Can you feel the wind, the air moving around your fingers? Can you feel the delight of being aspen? It's also as if aspen says, no more drought. And the dead spruce says, I can't take more heat and beetles. So just as the wind is murmuring up there now, over the ridge, murmuring with the treetops, both the dead and the alive ones, making sense and aliveness with the aspen leaves, and free-flowing around the boulders up there. Right now, inside the air up there. While in here, we are moving in the air too. We are making gusts and waves with our breaths. With our voices, we are making waves. We're making sense in the air, about the air and for the air. You know, this is no flaky, new agey stuff. It's very concrete, very palpable. The air in your nostrils right now, the breath you took, the molecules in it have changed. It's no longer that balanced that we relied on, that nourished human culture. This is hard science, and is also a new way of speaking about these things, taking away the abstractions, starting to notice the air. I think this is why we gather here too. Changing how we interact as humans with this living air. So all these wonderful solutions, and I just love listening to Emery Lovins speaking about them, and I loved all the presentations today, these are new small winds our throats makes. This is air-friendly words, resonating. So, with the global weirding of the weather, there are many good reasons for both fear and despair. The 5 warmest years in history human history has been 2014, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Yet, we can first grieve these losses of lives and of so much beauty, then choose to face the future with more sober eyes and determination. The new psychology of climate action lies in letting go. Letting go, not of science, but of the crutches of abstractions and doomism. We can reconnect to the air at a deep level. Then we can communicate by choosing to focus and telling the new stories of how we solve it together. Yes, less wastefulness. Yes, more renewables, hydrogen, climate justice, restoration. These are the stories of how we can achieve drawdown, the reversing of global warming through bold transformations. These are the stories of people and cities, companies and public bodies that are, in spite of strong headwinds, caring for the air. These are the stories of the steps we take because they ground us. They ground us in what we are as humans, earthlings inside this living air. Thank you.